Please tell
Yeah,
me.
I'll talk about CFD for large-scale engineering problems. I have, I have an idea that already CFD has been introduced in this course. And when we do CFD, especially from a textbook perspective, like if we start reading any of the CFD textbooks, or if we take a course in CFD, we see always we are restricted to very simple problems like flow in a channel, flow past a cylinder, things like that, in which the computational complexity is less, as well as we do not need to use complex models. But when we talk about real life engineering applications, we can see that they propose certain challenge over the textbook knowledge of CFD. So I'll try to address some of these issues related with complex engineering problems. So first, what we'll do is that we'll first discuss what is CFD, why do we need to do CFD, and I'll give you some examples in which we can see that there is no other way to do a right engineering design without utilizing CFD. And then we'll see some of the basic techniques of CFD, and we'll look into the large complex problems. And three of the issues I'll highlight today. There are many more issues involved with large engineering, real life engineering problems, but three issues which are common to all of the cases I'll consider here. One is grid generation for a complex geometry, turbulence modeling, and handling computational expense. And then we'll see, as the problems are very large in size, we really cannot do anything with our normal personal computer or laptop or simple servers and workstation. We need large infrastructure to solve them. And in reality, if we talk about, say, DRDO's some of the motions, DRDO's Agni missile motion, when they do CFD for calculating the drag and the path deviation due to that on that missile, they have to use large computing platform, and a paradigm called parallel programming, where multiple computers will work together to solve one particular problem. And see some of the nuances of parallel programming, and API, application programmer interface, called MPI, is used for that. I'll give you some introduction to MPI. Then we'll also see that in as a cutting edge technology, computers, graphics cards, graphics processing units or graphics cards, they can be utilized very efficiently to cater this computational resource. Instead of using computer CPU, if we can use high-end graphics cards, a lot of problems can be utilized, can be solved easily, and we'll see how this GPU what is this GPU computation and how does it work, and then we'll see some of the examples. Well, so I understand that this is a webinar. I really cannot see any of you while I'm presenting, and also, yeah, if I go with the pace, it might be difficult for somebody to keep hold on you on that. I mean, there can be several disturbances on your side also. Everybody is kind of working from home. So maybe at the after a few slides, I'll take a short break and I'll ask if you have any question and confusion and answer that. That will be really helpful here. Well, so we'll look into some of the problems in which we need to have a better understanding of the flow physics for design. One of the very famous problem is a Tacoma Bridge collapse in 1940 United States. It was a nice sunny day. There was no extra wind, etc. There was no storm, but people were going over the bridge. But suddenly this bridge started to vibrate, and you can see it's like black magic. Some kala jadoo happened, and this bridge is going to be demolished. And soon this bridge will be demolished. And now, if we know fluid mechanics, we can see that when flow passes over a bluff body, there are vortices which are shed in the flow. And as these vortices depart over the flow, so uniform velocity flow which passes over the bluff body, it creates vortices which called vortex shedding. If the frequency of the vortex shedding matches with the resonance frequency of the structure, there will be violent vibrations. And exactly same thing happened here. There are other cases, an unfortunate case. We all know about our great astronaut Kalpana Chawla, who died when the space vehicle was re-entering to the Earth's surface, and it broke down into multiple pieces. Again, this happened due to something called re-entry heating. At that high speed, the viscous layers produced a certain amount of energy, which created extremely high temperature, and the insulation of the spacecraft broke down. There is another example of oil rig explosion. There is a small video. Okay. Just to stop it. Okay. So it shows that from an oil well, the rig was coming out, and due to sudden gust in the oil velocity which is coming from the Earth's inner surface, the rig broke down, and as it broke down, oil started spilling over the sea, and every day it lost 5,000 barrels per day. It was a 2010 incident in United States, Gulf of Mississippi, and a lot of marine lives died. Many things happened in terms of money as well as in terms of environment. Great loss was there. And then another is a simulation of a tsunami. Ocean waves due to plate movement. The earthquake happened inside the ocean, and ocean waves came with a very high altitude and broke down everything in the shore. Now, if we try to design some of the engineering solutions for this, see what will be the structure of the houses, or how the coastal habitation should grow so that it can avoid tsunami. How should we design the oil rig, or how should we design the re-entry vehicle to avoid accidents? How should we design the bridges so that this type of collapse due to flat earth doesn't happen? We need to understand what is happening at the fluid flow and heat transfer level there. And we can also appreciate the fact that making a full-scale bridge and doing experiment over that and breaking it down is not a solution. Even you cannot do an experiment over this Columbia crash. You cannot make a vehicle and ask it to re-enter and blow it up. So you have to do something in terms of computer simulations here. You have to solve some governing equations and try to predict what will be happening there. Similarly, you cannot artificially create a full-scale tsunami. You have to use some of the computer methods there to understand the problem. So we do a quick comparison with experimental method and computational methods. We can see that there are experimental methods are absolutely necessary. You cannot avoid doing experiments. In order to get the exact behavior of the field, experiment has no substitute, but experiment has certain limitation for some of the cases, like for a oil rig explosion, or for a tsunami, or for a blood clot in brain. You cannot do experiments. You have to use theoretical study to predict the real-time behavior, what is going to happen on time, and to know that you have to solve some of the governing equations given the boundary condition and initial condition. So that is what we do when we do theoretical studies. It is a part of theoretical study where we use some of the governing equation, boundary condition, initial condition, and try to mimic experiments, try to see what will happen in time if we start with these conditions. So in this theoretical study, we start with some general governing equation like mass conservation, energy conservation, Newton's law of relativity, laws of thermodynamics, etc. For CFD, we do not use laws of relativity, but mass conservation, energy conservation, thermodynamics, Fourier's law, these are used. In many there are many such instances where these governing equations are not sufficient. For example, if there is a combustion, there will be chemical reaction. You do not have a governing equation, general governing equation for chemical reaction. So you use some models from that. These models arise from some mathematical studies or sometimes from experimental studies, like for elasticity. Hooke's law is a correlation or a model. You use this on top of the viscosity of the non-Newtonian fluid, that comes as a model. You use this on top of the governing equation, and when combining the models and the governing equation, we end up getting a when we combine this, we end up getting a set of differential equations which are many times higher order and non-linear. In some cases they do not have solution. In some of the cases, though they have solution, there is no analytical method, there is no differential equation solution technique in which you can solve this. And Navier-Stokes equation, which is solved for CFD, is a very good example for that. That for full-scale Navier-Stokes equation in complex geometries, there are solutions which are existing, but you do not know the analytical technique by which you can in pen and paper solve the differential equation and get the solution. You can do it only for the simplified cases. There are stability issues in the solution. Some of the stabilities can be physical with time. Some perturbation is growing, or some of the stabilities are mathematical also. Due to your solutions technique, you make the solution unstable. There are issues with the boundary condition. For example, for a tsunami, what will be the boundary condition? We do not know what are the conditions of ocean. It's changing with respect to time. So we have to use some modeling, some data-driven technique, etc. And there are issues, very significant issues with geometry and topology. In many cases, the geometry in which you will solve the governing equation is very complex. And combining all these facts, the only solution for complex problems remains is the computer simulation. And that is what we call CFD, that we will take governing equations for governing flow and heat transfer on a complex geometry, and we'll use computer methods to solve it. Now, when we talk about CFD, many times we use a CFD code or a CFD solver. And these CFD solvers are software like ANSYS, ISM CFD, OpenFOAM. There are many solvers like that. Also, you can write your own solver if you know how to solve these governing equations. And there are certain features of this CFD codes or solvers. Say, an aviation industry wants to buy a CFD software. So what will be the purposes? One will be to see how the flow is over the aeroplane so that it can predict what will be the drag, and based on the drag it can have an estimate that how much power has to be generated by the engine, how much fuel consumption will be there by the aircraft. Now this is one aspect. Next aspect is it will try to see that how the air conditioning is happening inside the aircraft. If everybody is getting sufficient air and not feeling unwell, because for high-speed aircrafts, it's for high-altitude aircrafts, it is a significant issue that the oxygen level and air pressure should be right in the cabin. So that has to be maintained. Again, considering the complexity of the cabin design, you need some CFD software to see if there is sufficient circulation there. And then, whether this circulation is sufficient or not, for that you need to understand how much air a person is inhaling and what is happening in his lungs. So in some case, say for a high-speed, high Mach number supersonic aircraft, one aviation company wants to see all these effects, he has to buy a CFD code. He will not be willing to buy CFD software for 3 different purposes. The same software should be able to solve all this, because it's the same governing equation, Navier-Stokes equation and energy equations, which is responsible for all these types of flow. So the same software will be able to handle all these problems. That is one capability of CFD software, that it should have many modules for different cases, but essentially it will solve one particular equation. Now again, it has to be portable in that sense that you use a Linux platform, you will get same solution. When you go to a Windows platform, you should get same solution. It should be portable across platforms. It should be scalable. As you increase the problem size, if you use sufficient amount of computing resource, you should get the solution. These things should be there. Also, you need pre-processing. That means a model to get the CAD geometry and generate grid over that. You need the pre-processing software and the post-processing software, so that after solving the equations, you will get some numbers, velocity, pressure, etc. What will a company do with that? He needs to see how the velocity is behaving, how the circulation is happening there. So a visualization package or post-processing software is important. These 3, pre-processing, post-processing, and the main CFD solver, or governing equation solver, these 3 are 3 essential components of CFD. We can look into a commercial CFD package, say ANSYS, CFX, StarCCM, ISM CFD. These are commercial CFD package. We have to solve flow in a, say somebody is solving flow in a bent pipe, bent elbow with a side inlet, and see how the flows are mixing using CFD. So what he has to do is to first generate a mesh inside the CFD. If you try to do it in ANSYS Fluent, you will get the geometry. First generate the geometry, then generate the mesh. Once generate the mesh, then for solution you have to find out, click some of the factors, that how will you solve it, what is the solver, what is the formulation, implicit or explicit, is the space 2D or axisymmetric, is it, do you have to solve for a steady equation or unsteady equations, how do you formulate the velocity, how do you formulate pressures, etc. Then you have to choose the property values, what is the density, Cp, thermal conductivity, viscosity, etc. Once you do that, then you have to give boundary condition. You have to identify different boundaries. Flow is coming from here, flow is going out here. What are the velocities here? If there is a heat flux, what is the heat flux here? If it is isothermal, what is the temperature at the boundary? You have to select the boundary conditions. And once selecting that, then your CFD software will start solving it. I think many of you have already used CFD software and know. And when CFD software starts solving it, it starts with a gauge value, and you see that this gauge value has some error. When you iterate in time, this error drop down, and at certain stage the error is very small. You say that the solution has converged. It starts with a gauge solution and converges to the steady state value. Now, then once you have solved it, then you can use your post-processing software. It should be the part of the same code, and see how the velocity and temperature varying within the domain. And you can be interested in some of the engineering components, like how pressure is varying along the bend, and you can plot these things. All these things will be taken care of by the software, or you may need some other software for post-processing also. But a good software like Fluent or I'll say ISIM-CFD or CFX will give you all these capabilities. Now the question comes that what this software has done. You have clicked on some of the modules and got some solution. But what has been done actually? Now if we try to address this issue, we have to see what is CFD. And what are we doing in CFD? We are solving a governing equation. This governing equation is differential equation. We are using computer to solve the differential equation. Can computers solve differential equation? Computers can only do plus minus, 0, 1, addition, subtraction. If we talk about differential equation, if we talk about derivative, if we talk about continuity, if we talk about integration, if we talk about integrating factors, it's not known to computer. So if we use computer to solve the equations, we have to pose this equation as linear equation or addition subtraction equation. Computers cannot directly solve governing equation. We need to convert these equations. Computers cannot directly solve differential equations. We need to convert this equation into linear equation, addition, subtraction equations to solve it. And that is precisely what is done inside the CFD code. So we consider a very simple example. Say you have to solve steady heat transfer equation over a rod, and the governing equation is k d2t dx square is equal to 0. K becomes constant, it is d2t dx square is equal to 0. Boundary conditions are given, some temperature here and some temperature here at the two ends of the rod. You know that you don't need anything to solve this. You know that this is a linear variation. You have to feed a line with the boundary conditions. But if computers can solve it, computers do not know what is linear. So you have to pose this equation in a form by which computer can solve it. And for that, one idea is consider number of points inside the rod, a finite number of points inside the rod. So instead of this rod being a continuous set of points, you get discrete points in each rod, in the rod. And distance between the points, let's say dx. So if temperature at this point is Tx, temperature at this point is Tx plus dx, temperature at the previous point is Tx minus dx. And now we use our favorite Taylor series expansion for Tx plus dx, right? Tx plus dx is Tx plus dt dx dx, and to an infinite series. Similarly, we write Tx minus dx as Tx minus dt dx into dx and again an infinite series. Now when we add these two up, we get d2t dx square is equal to Tx plus dx minus twice Tx plus Tx minus dx divided by dx square, plus this term will be cancelled out, this term will be cancelled out, so we left with 2 d4t dx 4 dx whole square to the power factorial 4 plus higher order terms d6t dx 6 dx whole to the power 4 d8t dx 8 dx whole to the power 6, so on. Now if my rod has a normalized length 0 to 1, dx is less than 1, so dx square will be a smaller term, dx to the power 4 will be a much smaller term, and we can say that if we can make dx smaller, this term will be very small. So we consider d2t dx square is only this, and let us say that this is the error in our consideration. There is an error, but as we reduce dx, this error will be small, and the largest term of the error is of the order dx square. So now we write the equation k d2t dx square is equal to 0 as d2t dx square is equal to tx plus dx minus twice tx plus tx minus dx by dx whole square is equal to 0 with this error. The largest term of the error is dx whole square. So as we will reduce dx, error will be small. And for every point inside the domain, we can get a similar equation tx plus dx minus 2tx plus tx minus dx by dx whole square is equal to 0. So we write the equations for all the points and substitute the boundary condition. T1 is given as Ta, T9 is given as Tb, or sorry, this should be T8, something. There is 1, 2, 3, 4. The points have been shifted, but this is essentially T8. T8 is given as Tb. So we get a set of linear equation. We can pose them as a matrix equation, and now there are many methods to solve this matrix equation. So we get a set of linear equations out of that, and computers can do at plus minus subtraction addition, so it will be able to solve the linear equations. And this method is called finite difference method. So in this method, we started with a differential equation, we converted it into a difference equation which a computer can solve. So this is based on Taylor series expression of difference terms. Temperature, velocity, pressure, some other field variable are solved at fixed number of predefined discrete points or not. So we do not solve it at all points, we get fixed number of predefined discrete points. The points have a distance dx in between them, we solve it there. Now when doing so, we know that we have encountered an error. Some part of the expression we have removed and considered that approximate expression. So there is an error. However, this error is bounded. That means we know that the maximum error is of the order of dx whole square. So as we will reduce dx, error will be small. So error is bounded by the truncated term of the difference expression. That is the error we are doing, and this error is a function of spacing between consecutive nodes. As we will reduce the, as we will increase the number of points, dx will reduce, error will be small. So this is one method of solving complex differential equations using computer algorithm. The other method, now one issue is that this method is
to take this session, which is inside can be revealed with the help of CFD. And let's see, this is again the animation.
Should I continue? Or any question? Any question?
No, sir.
No, sir. Please continue.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
please continue, sir.
So I'll just stop after a few slides, and if you have any question, you can ask them. So now, finite difference method is restricted for certain geometry. You can get, you have to get almost equispaced or regularly spaced points in each direction, so on. But in many times we encounter with a geometry which is not that regular. So instead of finite difference, what we use a finite volume method, which is essentially a flux balance equation. That instead of solving temperature equation here, consider that the entire domain is discretized into many control volumes, and calculate what are the heat fluxes coming out of the control volume. And if there is no heat generation, if there is no unsteadiness, the net heat flux coming out of the control volume must be 0. So equate it with the 0, and then write the heat fluxes as the Fourier expression, difference between temperature gradients between the neighboring points. And similarly, you get an equation involving temperature for each of the control volume, a linear equation. So for all the control volumes, you will get different equations. You will get a set of equations which you can solve. The other method is, which is popular again in CFD domain, is known as finite element method, which is mathematically very robust, but it's also complex. You can solve complex geometries, non-regular control volumes using that. That you have a domain over which some flow problem has to be solved. Discretize the entire domain into number of smaller elements, and then assume a test solution within each element. Now this test solution is a trial solution, so it is not the solution, but you assume some solution and put it into the governing equation. So what will be that say you are solving Laplacian of t is equal to 0. You assume t is equal to x. You will substitute Laplacian of, instead of Laplacian t, you will put Laplacian of x, and this will not be 0. So you will get Laplacian of x is some value, say f. So this f is the error. Now find out the error in all the control volumes and try to combine these errors, assemble these errors, and then integrate this error over the control, all the control volume, assemble them and minimize the integral to get the least error. For the least error, say your trial solution is a variable f, and now you substitute it, get the error, and try to get the least error. For the least error, you will get a different solution, and this solution gives you least error. Therefore, there is the maximum accurate solution. So the advantage is that this is mathematically very sound. You have closed form mathematical proof for this method. You can consider complex elements, complex geometries. But the disadvantage is that, as we discussed, finite difference and finite volume are very easy to understand from our intuition and already built ideas on heat transfer. But this has a difficult mathematics in some part of time. Discretization is also difficult for finite element method, but there is a very robust method also. Now again, what are we doing for these equations? We are solving governing equations in fluid mechanics using this technique. So earlier I have showed you for temperature equation, but now instead of temperature equation, this is continuity equation and Newton's second law, Navier-Stokes equation, which says that change of momentum is equal to the rate of change of momentum is equal to forces per unit volume. And once you look into these equations, they are also not very simple. Why not very simple? I mean, we can see that they are second order nonlinear equations, and I mean, if you ask me to solve a nonlinear equation analytically, I'll raise my hands. I need to know the exact technique, else I cannot solve a nonlinear equation. On top of that, they are second order equations, but pressure is first order. The continuity equation, we are considering incompressible flow. In incompressible flow or even in compressible flow, the continuity equation do not have pressure term. So pressure is in 3 equations, 1 equation doesn't have pressure. It is also unsteady time matching equation. For incompressible flow assumption, rho becomes constant, and we can see that one variable drops down, but solving pressure becomes difficult. Along with that, we have to solve first law of thermodynamics. So as a whole, it poses a complex set of equations on which we have discussed about some of the computer problems, but on which applying these computer methods are also not very straightforward. And then we have to use the boundary conditions, inflow, outflow boundary condition, boundary conditions at the wall, thermal boundary conditions, etc. So without boundary conditions, we cannot solve it. And when we try to solve this equation, we have to look for the nonlinearity. Some semi-explicit method has to be done where computer again can do plus minus, so it cannot solve nonlinear problem. So you have to convert it to approximate linear problem so that the computer can solve. And for the pressure issue, we have to use some method because pressure is not present in the continuity equation. You have to use some method like simple Markov and Cell algorithm cancel out pressure from the equation by taking curl of the momentum equation, the extreme function, vorticity, some methods have to be used. And then these solutions will move in the time. So we have to look into the stability, the time spacing. The error in the time should not be very high, so that the solution accuracy reduces and solution completely becomes unstable. So a lot of things have to be considered when you solve these equations. And one good part of using software is that software does everything for that. You don't need to think about that. But you have less flexibility while using a software. If you want to be sure about the errors that you are doing, if you want to be sure about whether your geometry modeling is correct or whether the modeling of some of the conditions are correct, you cannot rely completely on software, and you may like to write your own solver. And once you do everything, then you get a set of linear equation, which is a matrix equation like Ax is equal to B, where A can be a very large matrix. And why very large? Because as you increase the number of points, distance between the points will reduce, and you will get more accurate solution. So in order to get the accurate solution, you will end up with a very large matrix, million by million. And I'll show some of the examples where the matrix has 100 million rows, 100 million by 100 million matrix. So, and one idea is that this matrix is mostly zero, only near diagonal terms are non-zero, but away from that, the terms are mostly zero. But this is a large matrix, so one issue will be storing the matrix. Another issue will be using solvers very efficient matrix solvers for this matrix. And we can use something like GMRES conjugate gradient. There are efficient solvers for this. Or there are solver packages like HyperPET-C, where you have to call the library function, and there will be a library which will solve the matrix equation. And then you have to solve equations for all flow variables. At one point, if you are solving a 3D flow, there will be U, V, W, and pressure and temperature for incompressible flow. For compressible flow, there will be density also. So to solve equation for all the variables at this point. So overall, that becomes a very complex problem to solve. This solution of matrix equations become important here. Large number of points are required to get accurate solution. Why large number? Because as you increase number of points, distance between the points reduce and the error will reduce. But this will lead to a large matrix problem. The number of rows will be as high as 100 million or billions, and efficient solvers are important for that. If the matrix has an n rows, if you try to Gauss elimination, that will take n cube operations, and there will be numerical errors while solving this, which will be very high. We'll discuss about numerical errors in a while. So we use iterative methods for this, and we can see some of the iterative methods like Jacobi, Gauss-Seidel, successive over relaxation, and conjugate gradient. We take a small matrix, a number of rows 16 to number of rows 256. We can see that if you use Jacobi, the most primitive iterative method for 256 by 256 matrix, it takes more than 2 lakh iterations. But if you use same equation using conjugate gradient, it takes only 484 iterations. So by choosing the right matrix solver, we can solve the problem much and a much lesser time, because each iteration will take time in computer. So you can reduce the time significantly. And also you can see that what are the number of operations per iteration, so that you can estimate how much is the time. Matrix solution is a very important part in CFD solution, because you understand that we are talking about 256 by 256 matrix here, but in reality there are 100 million by 100 million matrices, and you need to understand the right matrix solver which will do your purpose with a less time and also with less number of operations per iteration. So I have an NPTEL course in matrix solver which is available online. If you are interested, you can go to YouTube and look into matrix solvers if somebody is interested. Matrix solvers are very important, and will come in a while what are their other importance also. Well, now once we solve this equations, we get two types of errors. One is called truncation error. We understand what is truncation error. We have a big expression, Taylor series expression up to infinite terms. We dropped some of the terms of this expression and got the terms which are convenient for us. Said that the rest of these terms are error in this approximation, and this error is called truncation error. We have seen that this error is the function of the distance between the points, dx. So as the space distance between the points will reduce, or as the number of points will increase, this error will be small and it will vanish. There is another error when doing CFD. That is called round off error. What is that? That if you calculate some number in computer, if you write 1 by 3, 1 by 3 is a recurring decimal number. Up to infinite digits, 0.3, 0.33333 will be there. But if you ask your computer to do that, it will do it up to 8 or 16 decimal. So, as say 22 by 7, it's a very large number. It really can go on. But if you use a single precision computer, it will cut this number and round it off in this value. So, whatever is rounded off, whatever is not being considered, that is also an error. In each computer operation, you are doing this error. Now, I consider that you have a large mesh point, you are solving over a million of points. In each of these points, you are doing this error. So, as they are piled up, the overall error is very high. So, as you increase the number of points, this error increases. And that is one issue with Gauss elimination, I say, in cube operations. So, each operation is doing error, so total round of error will be very high. So, as we increase number of points, truncation error decreases, dx decreases, but round of error increases. So, if we see error versus grid spacing, which is inverse of number of points, as grid spacing reduces, error reduces. As number of points increase, grid spacing reduces, error reduces. Then, at one time, round of error is very high, so that error starts increasing. So here truncation error is reducing, and at this stage round of error is increasing. So we are in CFD calculation, we are always doing some error, but there is a region where round of error and truncation error are kind of cancelling each other. We call this the grid independent solution. Because it's like a minima, so if you change your delta x slightly, there will be no change in the solution. And this is the preferred grid size in CFD solution. You try to solve a problem using that many grid points or that grid spacing, so that you get grid independent solution where truncation error is small, round of error is also small, overall error is small, and the errors are also cancelling each other. So what we understood till now is that when we do CFD, we are solving complex nonlinear equations in complex geometry using some approximate solution technique, and therefore there is always an error. So if we cannot control this error, our mathematical formulation is such that we can control this error of certain order dx squared, but this error is not zero. This error can be small, but it's not zero. So if this error is substantial, if we cannot control this error due to some issues in the program, some issues in the algorithm, we'll get wrong solution. So doing CFD doesn't ensure that you are getting right solution. You might get wrong solution when doing CFD. Therefore, it is extremely important that once you get a solution, you compare this solution with available experimental or analytical data, so that you have a confidence that your solution is not very wrong. There is an error, but the error is not very high. Error is within certain level, say 5%, 10% error. There will be always an error, but be sure that your error is small by comparing it with available data, and this is called validation. Any CFD study is not acceptable to anybody unless validation is shown for them. There can be some cases where you do not get experimental or analytical data on the same problem, but you have to choose a similar problem on which data is available and show the validation study. Then only your CFD model is acceptable. And after validation, you have to also tell that what is the accuracy of the code. If we further reduce the mesh, will my results improve? So you have to take different mesh points and show that your error is actually reducing by reducing delta x. That is called verification. Validation and verification are the gold standards for any CFD study. If you do not do validation, verification, your CFD study is incomplete. People call CFD as colorful fluid dynamics. We'll see in a while that many colorful, nice pictures come out of CFD, but these are considered as garbage unless it is shown that they are correct. Why it's important to show that they are correct? Because the approximations we talked about, the round of error we are doing in that number of computer operations, all these error in the solution. CFD solutions are never error free. So validation and verification gives you confidence that okay, I know there are errors. However, while doing the error, we are close to the actual solution. So these solutions can be accepted. Therefore, they are two important pillars of CFD study. Without them, any CFD study is not complete. I'll move forward to the next few issues, especially the issues with turbulence and mesh generation. But till now, if you have any question, I'll be happy to answer that.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes. Sir, actually, my query is like it is not related to CFD, but very basic. Like since we define heat like in thermodynamics, we have mathematical equation of energy conservation, and we say like heat is equal to like when we supply heat, there can be increase in internal energy or some work can be done. So
Right,
we
right.
also relate it with physical sense and all, and we also have mathematical equation. But sir, like since 1 year, when I was in second year until now, I cannot find like what is the physical relation of del square, like Laplacian operator, and it is used everywhere. I'm seeing, but I cannot relate it, sir. The del
So,
square and all.
okay. Okay, I mean, we can, it's an interesting question, though it's a little deviated. But you know about Newton's second law? Do you know about Newton's second law?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So what Newton's second law tells, force is proportional to acceleration, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, acceleration is rate
Rate
of
of
change,
change of linear. Yes, it is one and the same.
force is proportional to rate of change of momentum.
Linear. Yes,
Now,
sir. Yes.
right. So when you try to write your force equation, it is a quantity force which is equated with some rate, right?
Yes.
Rate means it's a derivative. Similarly, if you think of some
Sorry, sir, I could not hear you properly.
rate, force is proportional to rate of change of momentum.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So
You are
this
audible.
rate is a derivative. When we talk about rate is a derivative. Now we come back to something like viscosity. What is viscous force? Viscous force is proportional to rate of strain, rate of change of velocity.
Yes, sir.
So you can see that there are many physical quantities which are related with rate. Rate comes as a derivative. It can be in time, it can be in space. Now if you take rate of rate, say viscous force you get, then how viscous force you have to consider a small fluid element and tell how viscous force is changing within the fluid element, so that you can find out what is the net force, because every surface is experiencing a force. You have to find out difference of force between two surfaces and find the net force. So that will be rate of change of viscous force. Viscous force is itself related with rate of change of velocity, and you are again taking another rate of change of force. So that will be double rate of change of velocity, that is del square. Because all the governing equation we talk about are involve some of the rate. We do not consider we do not consider something which is constant in time. We are interested because things are changing in time. So we are always consider our time or space. We are always focused about rate. As rate comes, the derivative and rate of rate is double derivative. These things will come. Does it answer your question?
Yes, sir, I understand.
Yeah.
But you're telling ki rate of like viscosity is already related to rate, and we need to suppose we need to know about more about viscosity.
We need
So
to
we
see the difference of viscous forces, gradient of viscous force. So that is rate of
yes,
rate.
okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir. My answer.
So when you read textbooks, these things are best explained in textbooks. Read thoroughly textbooks.
Sir,
Okay,
uh,
sir.
sir, I have two questions, sir.
Yes.
Sir, one is that you are saying that ANSYS is mainly using the FEM technique to do the all.
No, I didn't tell that. I told that FEM is one way, but ANSYS uses mainly finite volume.
Sir, finite volume, sir.
Finite volume method.
Okay, sir. And another question is, sir, how these simulations are happening on the front end with the user interface. To happen this thing, what we have to write on the behind of the screen, sir?
So behind of the screen, you have to write you have to form a matrix which has to be solved. You have to take the linear governing equation, write a code which will write the approximate form of the governing equation as linear equations, and then write a matrix solver which will solve the matrix equation.
So generally, which programming language is mostly
You can
used?
use any language. C, C++, Fortran are most popular languages here, and people now are using Python.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Sir,
Hello.
yes.
Can you please explain more about simple and simplex method?
You are not audible. If you can repeat it.
Hello, sir. Can you please explain about simple and simplex methods?
Simple and simplex, I didn't plan to explain it here. I have to then show those slides, but I can quickly tell you what we are doing here. We have a set of nonlinear equations, right? Nonlinear unsteady equations with the pressure term. Now, what will you do with pressure? Because if you go to continuity equation, they consider the unsteady form. So rho del T cancels out. In the continuity equation, there is no pressure term, and pressure is only present in the Navier-Stokes equation. Now, when you have to find out solution of the Navier-Stokes equation, you have to find out how U is changing in time. If you, what will you do with that? Because there are many nonlinear times. So one idea is use explicit method for solving it. Explicit means use last time steps UVW value to find out del U del T term. While doing that, it is seen that you cannot find out pressure. So what you assume that pressure will be in the present time step, UVW will be in the last time step. And then you consider pressure present time step, but how to get pressure at present time step? Then you do certain modification so that pressure can be broken into two parts. One is the last time step part and one is present time step part. And then you use continuity equation to predict pressure in the present time step. So it's a semi-implicit method. In pressure, you are using implicit or present time steps method, and it's semi because in other terms you are using explicit and older time step method. But if you want to read about simple, you can take any book or just search in YouTube. There are very nice lectures by Professor Suman Chakraborty, Professor Amaresh Dalal. Many professors have given lecture on simple and look it into detail. I do not have simple slides right now. I do not explain it in much detail. But the basic method is you do a semi-implicit formulation. For nonlinear terms, you consider them explicitly from last time steps value, and for pressure, you take present time steps value, and then link the pressure with mass conservation equation.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I have a question.
Transient problems.
Okay,
How
so
to do graded difference for transient problems?
you are not audible. If you can repeat it.
So how to do graded dependence for transient problems?
Oh, consider a particular time step, see what is happening. Say you are considering oscillation. Many ways you can do that. One is that, say you consider oscillating cylinder. So consider the oscillating cylinder in the mean position and find solution. And then use another mesh and find solution there, compare these solutions. There are many ways, but essentially you take a snapshot at one point of time and compare the solutions. Or you can see how drag is behaving over time and compare the behavior time history of drag. These things also you can do.
Hello, sir. I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, in order for me to define the boundary conditions and in order to do any certain new work, so I need to do a background coding work so that I can able to define the boundary conditions of a certain experiment, sir.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So if you are using, say, ANSYS Fluent, you have to write an UDF to specify the boundary condition.
So I need to write a complete code in
You
order to
know,
prove the
your
condition.
code is independent of what the code you write, that is independent of boundary condition. That is what, say, simple we are discussing. How will you discretize the terms in the governing equation? How will you put it into so that you can take care of pressure, put it in the matrix form and solve it. Now, if you look into your matrix, say you are getting for let's go back to the temperature problem. You are getting a matrix. This matrix is singular matrix. It has determinant 0 unless you specify the boundary condition. So boundary condition is specified at few certain node points which are on the boundary. You have to write only equation for that node points. The stem of the matrix, the internal points, is unaffected by boundary conditions. It's already written. You only write an extra subroutine or an extra UDF over the existing software.
So will we be covering the coding part in this course?
No. Coding part required, I mean, it cannot be covered in 2 hours.
Okay.
It requires more time.
So how we should learn the coding part so that we could able to do fluent in our own? I mean, we could able to conduct our research or our explore interests in
So
our own.
one good idea is looking into it. I mean, there are many NPTEL lectures. Especially, I mentioned Professor Suman Chakraborty's lecture is quite popular in NPTEL. You can go through that. He has explained coding part also. There is another lecture from Professor Amresh Dalal. These two you can look into. But also, if you are interested, you can contact me later. I can give you more hands-on to look into the coding part.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I'll move forward, and if you have any further question, I'll take it in the next time.
Yes, sir. Please continue. At the last, we will take some questions.
Yeah, because it's time. But nice to get these questions anyway. So now when we go back, so this what I have discussed is precisely what we have in our textbooks. Simple math, matrix solvers, everything are precisely real event finite volume textbook parts. And this, if you go back to again textbook, I mean, last question was on coding part. So if you start writing your own CFD program, you will probably write a conduction equation for flow for a lead channel, or you solve Navier-Stokes equation to get fluid flow in a channel or in a lead-driven cavity. This type of problems, which are very simple problems in terms of complexity. I mean, these are important in order to learn CFD, in order to practice some of the efficient methods or accurate methods in CFD, in order to get hold of. These are like Sargam. In order to learn, it is important. In order to make you more expert in this field, it is important. But these are not the actual music. You cannot solve industrial problems using that. So what are the issues in solving large practical problems? The solution domain is in general not Cartesian. Grids have to handle geometric complexity. So the finite difference of finite volume we talked about are sorry, just a second. Yeah. Wait a second. The finite difference or finite volume part that we talked about cannot be directly used here because the geometry is complex. So we'll look about this issue in a while. The geometry may be moving and deforming. Say we consider the vibrating bridge, the flow domain air volume, that air volume, control volume in which the bridge is vibrating, that is changing every moment because the bridge is deforming. Boundaries are changing. There can be fluid structure interaction. Fluid is giving force to the structure, and structure is moving and again giving back forces to the fluid. So these are complexities in the real life problems. Turbulence can be there. Due to turbulence, we may not have a steady, nice solution. The solution is varying randomly, and there is a statistical method which is required to understand the solution. So we need to understand the right physics for modeling the turbulence and get the statistical measure. There can be multi-phase flows. We have to track the phase boundary between two phases. Say a bubble is rising. Every moment you need to understand what is the air-water interface. So you have to track the phases. There can be non-Newtonian fluids for which The second order term also doesn't remain such nice linear term. There are more complexities. There can be multi-physics behavior. For example, if combustion is there, you have to model reaction on top of that. There can be multi-scales. Changes are happening at different levels. In the oil rig explosion problem, that from the oil was coming and going into the sea. From the oil well, if you come to the oil well, it is few inches. The pipe has diameter of few inches. But when oil comes into the sea surface, it spans over kilometers. So somewhere your grid size is inches, somewhere it is kilometers. So this multi-scale has to be handled. And again, when we look into a large problem, large number of grids and large number of time steps will be there, which demand very high computational time. So combining all these facts, the problem becomes very complex in solving using computers. And these three issues I'll discuss now. One is non-Cartesian grids, where you have to use some technique for grid generation. One will look into turbulent fluctuations, and combining them we'll see what is the computational requirement and how can we cater that computational requirement. So one important issue is grid generation for complex geometry shapes. If we think of nice Cartesian grids, x constant, y constant, z constant line, the generating grid is very simple. You just have to take x constant, y constant lines. Also, defining the derivatives are very simple. When you write del 2u, del x square, y and z constant, and only changing u in the x direction, you do forward. But if you have a non-Cartesian mesh, for example, you get a mesh like this, how will you define your del 2u, del x square? That itself becomes difficult because no two points have same x location, same y and z location. But also it becomes important that how do you generate mesh, how do you fit this geometry with equispaced or nearly equispaced points. So you can, one of the idea of complex geometry shape is structured grid mesh generation. The volume and area is to be divided into small shells. Each cell in the structured mesh has regular shape and defined number of neighbors. So though we do not go into x constant line, but we can probably go into some other coordinate, zeta constant line. So we'll get 1 point if we move in the right, 1 point if we move in the left, 1 point if we move in the 1 point if we move in the bottom. We get the defined number of neighbors for each of these points. That is important in mesh generation. Even if it's a complex geometry, we can get with that and get IJK indexing of this cell, which will help us in writing the program. Also, we can try to ensure that the edges are orthogonal. The grid surface is orthogonal to the grid edge, so that if we calculate the fluxes, they are calculated correctly. The aspects while doing this grid generation is aspect ratio, orthogonality, skewness. If the grid is very skewed, it will remain orthogonal and you will get wrong result. Stretching factor, if there is more stretching, say delta x here and delta x here, if they are very different, then there is a high stretching ratio which introduces more truncation error. When you do the Taylor series or finite volume approximation, we get more error. So these have to be controlled. One of the idea of grid generation is called algebraic grid generation, that you have a geometry like this, x constant lines, y constant line, and a parabolic boundary. These are the boundaries and you have to fit mesh inside this. So how to do it? You use a coordinate transformation and transform this into a rectangular domain. Instead of xy, come to xi eta line, and then fit regular mesh here, and then map this mesh back into the actual geometry. This is called algebraic mesh generation. You fit mesh points here. You will get nearly equispaced, not exactly equispaced points, but nearly equispaced points. There is very less computation. Only you have to find out the right xi and eta and do the transformation. But you can see that the grid lines are not orthogonal. The angle between two of the grid surfaces are not 90 degrees. So if you have to calculate a flux here, say I give the value temperature here, I get the temperature here, I try to find out Q, it will not be right because the grid line, the joining line is not orthogonal to the grid surface. So this is an issue with algebraic grid generation. A better solution can be obtained by PDE based grid generation. Grid generation for solving partial differential equation. If we can say we have this geometry and we fit for xi and eta, we'll find out you solving partial differential equation del square xi is equal to 0, del square eta is equal to 0. And solving this in xy plane, we'll get xi eta and map it back to the Euler problem. Now we get orthogonal grid points. The grid lines are perpendicular to the grid surfaces. And this has a better grid quality. We can also use some source term and reduce the mesh distance of the mesh points. We can control the stretching, etc. However, it requires solving a partial differential equation, which is same like another CFD problem. Therefore, heavy computation is associated with that. In order to generate nice orthogonal mesh, you have to do large computations. And then the next solution is unstructured grid generation. You do not need to think about regularity in the grid surface. You just put number of different type of mesh points inside the geometry, and these are very much this is a complex unstructured grid. You just everything, hanging nodes, then the grid points have without no neighbor, square Cartesian or square domains, triangular domains, irregular domains. You have everything here. And there are some algorithm like Delaunay triangulation, Boyer algorithm, etc. What you get here are the number of the coordinate of the vertices and the table how these vertices are connected with each other. Orthogonality is not ensured, and therefore the standard CFD techniques are to be quite differently posed in order to solve the unstructured mesh problems. So the solution technique will change. The solver methods will change heavily. You need a different solution techniques so that even using this mesh, you can control your error and do not get a physical solution. But grid generation efforts are minimum because the orthogonality, regularity has not to be mentioned. These are the three general popular grid generation technique. Algebraic method is a primitive method, but mostly popular are structured orthogonal meshes, curvilinear meshes, and unstructured grids. Unstructured grid is being used heavily because many groups have modified their codes for unstructured grids. And then there is another method called block structured grid. The geometry can be complex so that you cannot fit a regular structured grid in the entire geometry. You divide this geometry into many blocks and generate a structured orthogonal grid within each block. So geometry is defined into any block. Each block has regular structured mesh. Then for a complex geometry, you can divide it into many small simple blocks and generate a mesh within it. And then these meshes will be mapped at the block boundaries. And with this, even say you are solving a wind turbine case where some blades are rotating, something is fixed. For the rotating part, you can generate a different mesh. For the fixed part, you can generate another mesh. And the rotating part mesh, you can give do some changes in the governing equation and put them in the rotating reference frame so that by the governing equation itself, it starts rotating. Sorry. And you can use multiple reference frame. One is fixed reference frame, which is the fixed part. Another is multiple reference frame, which is the rotating part. And solve turbine for wind turbine or hydraulic turbine flows with rotating blocks. This multiple reference frame is quite popular. Now comes the next issue, which is turbulent flows. Many of the flows are turbulent, high Reynolds number, high speed flows, and therefore these flows do not pose a nice steady solution. The solutions are changing at every instant reactively. There are some very canonical popular experiments, some wind tunnel turbulent flow. At one location of the wind tunnel, somebody from ONERA, this is Professor Gagne's group, they measured velocity at some location and saw that though largely nothing is changing, but velocity at one point is rapidly changing and changing randomly in time. And then he plotted this velocity as a histogram, that how many times at one velocity he sees. And it is seen that the average velocity is seen maximum time. So the number of observations here and velocity is here. The mean velocity, which is around 42 meters per second here, that is seen for maximum observation. So turbulence has a nice property that the mode and mean are at the same location. Statistically, mean value will be most probabilistic value. It has a probabilistic distribution. Turbulence comes with a statistical nature. It has a probabilistic distribution. However, if you average it, you will get the mean value, because the mean has the highest probability. So it's like more like a normal curve. Now, one of the turbulent physics is complex. One of the first person to look into turbulent physics was great Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci, we know he was a polymath. He did everything. Everything under the sun was done by Da Vinci. But at the core, he was an artist. So Da Vinci was sitting on top of a bridge and trying to draw how the curls happen on the water surface as water passes through the bridge. While doing that, he identified what is turbulence. He named it as turbulence. At the term turbulence came from the Latin writing of Da Vinci, turbulenza. He wrote that observe the motion of the surface of the water which resembles that of where. He is an artist, so he used to make resemblance with beautiful things, which has two motions. One is caused by the weight of the hair coming from top to bottom. Another is by the direction of the currents. Thus, the water has the eddying motion. One part is due to principal current. If you go to a river, it is flowing from north to south. That is the main motion. The other part are random and reverse motion. So turbulence is identified with two components of velocity. One is the main motion. If you average out, you will get the main motion, mean velocity. But if you see at any point of time, you will get random velocity, because this main motion is contaminated with a random and reverse circular motion. So many eddies are there. These eddies are superimposed over a constant velocity flow, and you get turbulence flow. And there are more issues on the turbulence physics. After certain Reynolds number, flow becomes unstable and it starts seeing turbulence. One of the scientists who quantified this observation was Osborne Reynolds. He wrote that turbulence is two parts. One is the non-random average part, another is the fluctuating part and the random part. And he decomposed the main velocity as the mean and the fluctuating part, and then put this decomposition into the Navier-Stokes equation. Came with the Reynolds average Navier-Stokes equation, where the expression for the steady flow is put in terms of mean velocity. This will be U-bar also. And there is another extra term like a stress term which is coming due to the fluctuating velocity. So these fluctuations in the turbulence, in order to their sustenance, they take away energy from the mean flow. And this energy carrying, because there is a velocity, this energy carrying is by exerting forces on them. So turbulence asserts some force on the mean flow field, and this is known as Reynolds forces or Reynolds stress terms. If you have to solve for the mean velocities, you need to use a model to get the Reynolds stress term. And this model is, there are 6 components of Reynolds stress tensor. There is an eddy viscosity model in which it is considered that the Reynolds stress is proportional to the strain rate of the mean flow field. And the constant of proportionality is known as eddy viscosity. So using this model, you can put it here. You will get the entire equation. This is U bar. There is a typo here. The entire equation in terms of U bar and P bar, and you can find out the mean velocities. These are called turbulence models, that how Reynolds stress terms will be computed, and there are many models: 0 equation model, 1 equation model, 2 equation model, 7 equation models. As you increase the number of equations, you get more physical solution. And all these equations are partial differential equations. So they also end up in another matrix equation, and you have to use a matrix solver over entire grid points to solve this equation. Therefore, when you are solving Reynolds average Navier-Stokes equation, you are again solving few more equations on top of the actual set of equations. However, these equations are models, so these are some dependency with experimental correlations, and they may not give you right solution for very complex flows. One of the physics-based method is called large eddy simulation, where large eddies, because turbulence has many vortices or eddies inside it, the large eddies are explicitly calculated. We do not use any model for that, but for small eddies, a subgrid model is used. We'll see some of this subgrid model, but a model is used for small eddies. And there is a method called direct numerical simulation, which uses a very fine mesh, so that even for the smallest eddy, we can compute what is happening there, but the number of mesh points are very high. So in between we get large data simulation where some of the ADs are explicitly calculated, less dependence of model, and the smaller ADs are modeled. And this is the energy cascading in turbulent, a large eddy that will break down into small eddy. This small eddy is unstable and will further break down into smaller eddy, and finally it will go to the molecular level and there will be viscous dissipation. So what is done in large eddy simulation, that a cutoff filter is used in the governing equation, and it is considered that any velocity above any velocity or any fluctuation above the grid size or the cutoff size is directly calculated. Anything beyond that is modeled, and something like subgrid model is used. And there are methods to find out that what should be the cutoff length, what should be the grid size to do large eddy simulation. However, it is seen that the grid size is also small. So you need, even when you are doing large eddy simulation, you are using less modeling, but you have to use a large number of mesh points. Combining this, we can see that if you are doing DNSA, the grid spacing to resolve smallest turbulence scale is of the order of Reynolds number to the power -3/4. So if you have Reynolds number of 10,000, your grid size is 0.001. That means in unit length you have 1000 points. So in a unit cube you will have 10 to the power 9 points. So that tells that if you are solving turbulence, you have many equations, computational cost is heavy, also number of grid points are very high. So we'll quickly look into an estimate of computational requirement to solve a large turbulent flow. We consider Reynolds number 10 to the power 6, which is like in aerodynamics, this is very common to have Reynolds number 10 to the power 6. And as the grid spacing is RE to the power -3/4, in a three-dimensional geometry, this will require 10 to the power 13 grid points, large number of grid points. We consider of one time iteration using iterative methods, there will be n operations. So 10 to the power 13 floating point operations will be there. Typically a time step, say at 10 to the power -3 seconds. So therefore, if we have to simulate flow in an unit cube, a three-dimensional unit cube geometry of 10 to the power 6 Reynolds number for 10 seconds, we need 10 to the power 17 floating point operations. And 10 to the power 6 is not very high, but we are trying to resolving the smallest turbulent length scale so that we don't need any more. And we assume the fastest computer, we heard about 3.2, 2.6 gigahertz computer, but let's take 10 gigahertz computer. Let us assume that this is the fastest computer. So we have to do 10 to the power 7 floating point operations, and the computer speed is, we have heard about 3 gigahertz computer, we are considered 10 gigahertz computer. The computer can do 10 giga floating point operation per second. Therefore, the total number of operation time will be 10 to the power 17 divided by 10 into 10 to the power 6, which is 10 to the power 10 seconds, 307 years. So if we have to compute velocities to the smallest turbulent length scale in a unit cube at 10 to the power 6 Reynolds number, this in today's best computer, this will take 317 years. And impossible, nobody can think of doing that. Granddaughters, grandsons, grandson will probably be alive to see what I am running today, and the computer has to be given power and operation over 370 years. This is out of question. Also, if we can think that, okay, let's start running that, we cannot solve it, because for 10 to the power 13 grid points, the matrix size will be 10 to the power 13 into 16 byte, and in whole world you cannot buy a RAM which can load that amount, that matrix size. So what is the solution? I mean, it looks like solving 10 to the power 6 Reynolds number to the finest turbulent length scale is impossible in terms of computational expense. So right now we have to talk about high performance computing which can cater this. Till now we have talked about CFD, which is a handshake between fluid mechanics and mathematics. We do some do some of the mathematical operations over the governing equation and get CFD. Now I bring the third guy in, who is computer science. So CFD talks with computer science and develops something called high performance computing to cater this heavy computational load. And the idea of high performance computing is that you get the CFD program And now you distribute the CFD job among many computers. Many computers will be there working in parallel together to solve this problem. Now, while saying so, I'll discuss some of the issues of high performance computing, but a question naturally arises that where can you get many computers? If you are sitting on some, say, IISc or some of the leading labs of DRDO, you might get a large mini computer system where you can solve 317 computers you get, so 317 years job is done in 1 year. But in other colleges, other organizations, how will you get them? Recently, our government has started an initiative called National Supercomputing Mission, in which in many places in the country there will be such many parallel computing systems in which you can access from your own organization. You have to go to NSM, get an account from them, and then you can access their large supercomputers where you can run these programs. So this is either I'm talking about in terms of the theoretical aspects of using high performance computing. It's not beyond our reach. It has been brought into reach through National Supercomputing Mission. There are already in IIT BHU, there has been a system, IIT Kharagpur is building a system which outsiders also can access and run jobs in many computers, so that a large computing problem which you even cannot think of solving in single computer can be done. So we will see some of the aspects of that. If we talk about a serial or standalone computing, a single computer is doing a large computing problem. The issue can be the load, or the memory can be too heavy to carry. It's like a person is trying to work with a large load and going from one place to another place. The load can be too heavy to carry. One person cannot raise the load. Like that matrix size, the 10 to the power 13 grid point matrix, a single RAM cannot fit the matrix. Also, the task will take astronomically long time. It's 317 years. If you are given the entire Himalaya, if you have to move, let's talk about a entire building, you have to move, you cannot move it. Even if you carry the load, raise the load, you cannot move it. So it can take astronomically long time. One solution is that in parallel computing, one is shared memory, that you ask many people to work together, raise the load and work together with that load. Or you break the load in distributed computing, you break the load into many small parts and ask everybody with a smaller load to work. The small one requires more synchronization because a large load is being taken by many of them, but they do not need to communicate. They know that they are starting from one place, will go to another place. Here, you need communication among all of them because they know that they have small units and they have to go to the same position and put them in the right order. So more communication is required. But that is essentially what we do when we talk about parallel computing. We are, instead of one person doing that, we either ask many computers to take care of the entire problem, or we break down into smaller problems and ask each of the computers to look into the smaller computers. The important issues are how the loads will be distributed, how will it be synchronized, and what will be the communication between them. So one question comes, is the more the better? If we keep on increasing the number of computers, we will get better solution. So that will give less weight for each people, so increase in speed. However, there can be non-uniformity in distribution. So one computer is done, another computer is still working for it. Non-uniformity in the distribution. There can be more communication and synchronization steps. All the computers need to communicate among them. And as many computers are there, more communication on them. So all of them can give some overhead. And instead of using a 45-degree speed up, as you are increasing more computers, similar amount of speed you are getting, you can get little less speed up. So you may actually need to use large number of computers to get some substantial speed up. However, it is doable. The job what I have shown you in 317 years, that can be done in 6 months using many computers, using say 1,000 computers. So this is a parallel computing platform. This is one of the fastest parallel computer in the world, Sierra in Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. It has 190,000 CPU cores and 1780 GPUs. It can give 125 petafloating point of flops per speed and 1.3 petabyte RAM is there. So large computing tasks can be actually handled by this computer. And the architecture is this, that there is a director in which you can access it from outside, and then through switch all these computers. So these racks are with computing cores. So all these, and through a switch all of them are connected. So a single job can be distributed over them. And there are some of these models. I'll discuss about this model so you get an idea what is parallel computing. Say we talk about single instruction, single data, or SISD model. It's a way how a natural computer works. There is an instructions pool, there is a data pool. You ask your computer to write a plus b is equal to c. It will take a plus b from here. It will take c from here, do the operation, and write back a plus b. It will take from here, take the instruction, write back c here. If you have a is a vector of, or a is an array of size 10,000, b is an array of size 10,000, c is an array of size 10,000. So there will be 10,000 access of data. A1 plus b1 is equal to c1, a2 plus b2 is equal to c2. Similarly, 10,000 times it will access it. It's like you are waiting in a checking desk of the airport. You are going there one by one, per passenger is going there, and the guy working on the front is checking. So sequentially, one by one, jobs will be done. This is how an ordinary computer works. But we can think of a single instruction, multiple data model. That there is a data and multiple computers are there. So somebody is looking into A1 plus B1 is equal to C1. At the same time, it is looking A2 plus B2 is equal to C2. It is looking A3 plus B3 is equal to C3. Same operation is being carried by different cores from different locations of the data. And this is one way how the parallel computer works. Say in IT industry, credit card information is processed for 1 lakh people. So same information, how much is subtraction, how much is the addition in the credit card account. Each computer is doing for 1,000 people, so that in 1,000 computers can do this job in 1,000 time, which would have been less by required by one computer. So you reduce the time. There can be multiple instructions in single data type. That's from the same information, from the same data, many instructions have to be processed. Say you have your PAN number available to income tax department. They can check what are your salary, how much tax has been withheld as TDS, what are your foreign transactions, if you have done any investment. So multiple information is being processed, multiple instruction is being processed on the same data, and different computers can do that. This is also one way of parallel computing. And the most flexible way which we use for most of the scientific computing is multiple instruction, multiple data model. That is, there is a data pool where many data is there, and each computer is looking into different part of data and doing different information. However, they have a synchronization and communication. So it's very, very well used in scientific computing. Most of the models methods we do in distributed computing use this method. It has more communication between process and more flexibility. Nevertheless, we use a single program multiple data model most of the time. One program is launched, but it looks into different instances on different data. And you can use many computers so that they work in parallel and get your job done. And these are the elements when you do a parallel program. You have to identify how many people are doing that work, how many computers are involved, what are required to begin the work, what will be the initialization, who does work, how will be the work distribution, how the data and IO part will be accessed, is there any communication required between them, is there any synchronization required between them, and how can you put everything together and get the results. These are the main elements. And for doing these tasks, these will be done on top of your regular CFD code, like Fortran C, C++ code. These are done by application program interface called OpenMP or message passing interface MPI. This is for shared memory, single instruction, multiple data model. This is for distributed memory, multiple instruction, multiple data model. And MPI is one idea for that. It is a message passing model. It gives library functions to be used with C, C++ Fortran program. It it gives that with the protocol and semantic, it tells that how in parallel computers you can take your job and ask many computers to work together to solve that problem. So there are there is called small because there are MPI is a free open source software. You can start learning on its own if you are interested. There are only 6 basic functions by which you can parallelize any job and ask many computers to do that. But there are also many other functions which help you to optimize that job. You can parallelize it using 6 functions, but for getting better flexibility and better speed, you can use many other functions. But if you just knowing 6 functions is fine. It is scalable. That means as you increase number of processors, you will get better speed up. It is flexible also. So if you go from different platform, you do not need to write the programs. These are the 6. There is 7 one function extra. 6 functions and 1 call also. 7 calls using which you can parallelize any function. So I will not come into detail of MPI, but there are send receive how data will go from one processor to another processor that you can do from MPI. How one processor can broadcast data to other processors that you can do MPI. I'll show you one simple example. Say I have to solve Laplacian of t in a large domain. Now, how can I do parallelization? I'll break it into 4 small subdomains and build the matrix equation in each of the subdomains, and different computers will be asked to solve each of the domains. So when we break down into very small subdomains, the matrix size reduces because the total number of points is small. Instead of the total number of points in this domain, number of points in each of the subdomain is small. So each subdomain gets smaller matrices. However, also the computation reduces because each subdomain is working only over less number of points. However, they are connected. So if I take only one subdomain, so if I consider this subdomain, it has boundary condition here, boundary condition here. We do not have boundary conditions here. We only know that this boundary is connected with the next subdomain. So there has to be an iteration among the subdomains itself so that they can dynamically exchange boundary condition and update. The temperature here will be updated at this temperature. This point's temperature will go and update it at the boundary condition for this domain. So this dynamic exchange of boundary condition takes place. And that is precisely what MPI does. MPI sends data from one processor to other, receives data from the other processor to this processor, and dynamically exchanges the boundary condition. But you reduce the problem size, distribute into many computers, each computer gets smaller problem, reduce the problem size and increase speed. So these are the key points in parallel program. You have a large domain, you break into many small domains, allocate this decomposed domain to the processor, see that the load is balanced, each processor is getting nearly same amount of work, and do calculation in each domain. You have to synchronize them so that the calculation speed is not different. One is going to third iteration, another is first iteration, then this boundary exchange will not work. So this synchronization introduces latency. Some computers have to wait because others have not finished that work. You have to communicate across the processor because dynamically boundary conditions will be exchanged among the subdomains, so communication will be there. This communication, there has some bottleneck or deadlocks have to be removed while doing the communication. Communication has to be done smoothly. Then you have to assemble the result and terminate it. There will be overhead. Due to overhead means there will be some compute time which is not in your original program but will be added on the parallel program due to initialization, synchronization and communication. And we can see that we have looked into 3 million grid points in a block structure. We should discuss about block structure. Within each block we get a structure. Now each block is given in a separate processor. So there are this 3 million mesh is divided into 1000 blocks and 1000 processors are working on that. And we started making, say, first we gave into 10 blocks, then 50 blocks, so on. We started making changing the number of processors and show that initially we are getting, for one iteration, in 1 second, we are getting 0.5 into 10 to the power minus 4 iteration. That was the computational speed. And it increased to 5 times more as we increase number of processors. So as we increase number of processors, computing speed increases. Now, there are some of the examples. This is a numerical combustion, how combustion jet spreads over the domain with respect to time. It required 5 million grid points. 10 equations were solved because with UV-WP equation, different species are there. The species equations are solved. 1.5 million steps, 40 days calculation uninterruptedly in 300 processors give solution up to 15 seconds here. Consider the fact you have to solve in one processor, this would have been taken more than few years. This is a solution of a impeller style tank. Inside the tank, impeller blades are there, multiple fluids are given, and the blade rotates. As the blade rotates, it churns up the fluid inside this, and the fluids keep on mixing. So in 3.8 million grid points, 1000 processors for 60,000 iteration took 2 months time. Even in a single processor, we wouldn't have thought of solving this problem. For aerospace, it is seen that 368,000 page, it is solved over 384 domains, and we get the velocity. And you can see that though we use different computers to look into different parts, finally by dynamically exchanging the boundary condition, we get nice smooth contours. This is hurricane simulation. This is a very important case because hurricanes are recently both Kolkata and Bombay were hit by storms, and lot of devastations happened. But almost no life has been lost because people could predict that where this storm is going to hit, where this cyclone is going to hit, and people were evacuated from that. And this is how this is done. The storm is a fluid mechanics. The hurricane is motion of air and water. It's a fluid mechanics. So they solve the equations and predict where it is going to be. So if you have to do it for benefit of mankind, the solution is required very quickly. In maybe 3 days after the forming of the hurricane, you need to sort cyclone. You need to tell that where this cyclone is going to be. So every time you have to use large number of processors for that. And this is a simulation of Hurricane Katrina, which hit Gulf of Mexico earlier, and I mean how it's going to hit, where this how will be the wind gusts where it is hitting, etc. Sorry, this didn't come right, but you can see that it. I cannot show it here. I think you picked up the wrong animation, but it almost matched with the satellite image, and this is done by supercomputing or parallel computing only, because if you have to think of solving in one processor, you didn't get right time. You didn't get time so that you can predict the landfall before it's hit and evacuate that part and rescue it. There are applications in biological flows, that how fluid passes through the artery and what are the deformations of the artery. And it's also seen that if you increase number of processors, you get good speed up. Now, one part is that we talked about 300,000 processors, etc., which required a huge system. It is recently observed that graphics card or graphic processing unit, or all of our computers have a graphics card. Some of the high-end workstations have GPUs or NVIDIA graphics card. They can be used very efficiently to do this work. And it is seen that over last few years, compared to CPU's power, GPU's power, computing power is much higher. So this graphics card can replace hundreds of processors required for high performance computing. And they are efficient in matrix calculation. Although they are initially used for game development, now they are used in CFD also. And we can see this is the architecture of GPU, but quickly I can tell you that this is the cores of the computing units in a GPU. In a Tesla V100 GPU, there are 5,000 cores, and it's a very small unit. It will fit any of the high-end workstation. It's like a small box which can provide thousands of computing cores, and therefore very good parallel setup. But the difference is that this is a CPU card where there is a large cache, there is a control unit, and many arithmetic unit. And GPU card, then GPU, there is the device RAM is there is a small cache, small control, and many cores are there. So there are very small control over the computing cores, and you have to rewrite the programs so that they can port well to the GPU. Directly, if you can take your CPU program and put a GPU in your computer, and when it say 10,000 rupees you can get good GPUs, you cannot get the speed up. You have to rewrite your program so that they run well in GPU, because they have some architectural difference with CPU. This is how the GPU memories are there, not here. So when you run a program in a GPU, you directly cannot access the GPU. You need a computer. From computer's memory, data is copied to GPU's memory, and from the computer CPU, instruction goes to GPU. It launches as number of threads. Each thread works on one of the GPU cores, and you can get large number of threads, thousands of threads operational at one point of time. And there is a programming model called CUDA provided by the GPU manufacturer NVIDIA, with which you can do all this stuff. You can launch this large number of threads and can get very fast solution. So your job looks like the serial part of the job where you do not need parallelization. It can launch on the host or the CPU. And then when you need parallelization part, then it can go to multiple GPUs or multiple cores of the GPUs. Large number of threads can be activated. Again, once this is over, it can come back to CPU. Again, when parallel part is required, the compute heavy parts are there, it can go to GPU. And we can show, and this is using GPUs, you can you also use GPU CPU together, hybrid processing, etc. You can get up to 55 times speed of CPU. Earlier in 2009 they showed 8.5 times, but now GPUs have improved also largely over last 10 years. Now we are getting 55 times speed, or even more speed than that compared to a single CPU calculation. So the GPUs essentially work in parallel method, that different parts of this job will be launched as a thread and multiple threads will be active over different GPU cores, but a large speed up can be obtained there. So this was an example in 2015, even we are getting better speed now, which was in a serial or a CPU taking 800 seconds flow in a lid-driven cavity. That was done in a GPU in 100 seconds, 8 times speed up, and the results compared directly with experimental results. We are doing GPUs with now 40 times speed up. We got over 4.2 million cells. So you didn't need any other computer, only one computer with a GPU card given 40 times speed up in the, for calculation, stenotic artery, arterial stenosis, and what will be the forces, stresses on the artery wall after stenosis using GPU. And we usually do a code profiling, look into the main solver, see that this subroutine is taking maximum time, and then put this subroutine into GPU and reduce the time. And it is saying that 70 times speed up is obtained for another problem with GPU, where with 16 core CPU we are getting only 10 times speed up. With a single GPU we are getting 70 times speed up. Moving boundary case for 3 million cells, 40 times speed up in the solver is obtained in GPU. This is a turbine blade simulation using GPU, and you can see that they have used 16 GPUs initially with a single computer getting 120 iterations per hour. With the GPU it is 21,000, 16 GPUs are there. So using MPI they gave it to different CPUs, and each CPU is connected with GPUs. Now they are getting 21,000 iterations per hour, where CPU was getting 100 iterations only. So it's more than 200 times, nearly 200, 150 times faster using CPU. And people are also calculating how much cost in terms of energy the entire computation per hour, so computing per hour takes. Where CPU for this 120 takes $10, GPU's cost is cheaper, also takes $6. So GPUs are one of the recent developments in CFD technology. There is a CFD simulation on temperature over turbulence blade, which are getting fast solution, also cheap solution. These are simulation of vortex isosurface on the under-expanded jet, and you can see that this is the most advanced GPU, Titan V GPU, where it is getting 1900 times speed up respect to one CPU core. as the grid size is 25 million, say. And you can see as the grid size is improving, the speed up is also improving. Very high speed up can be obtained. There is one simulation for a bubble column reactor using ANSYS Fluent only, so you don't need to write the program. You can use Fluent and Fluent's GPUs. And it required, the mesh size is not large, but it requires solution for 314 seconds to see how the bubble column is behaving. And it is saying that GPUs were, 2 Intel CPUs were doing in 10 to the power 4 seconds, GPU does something in 5 seconds. So the GPU compute reduces computing time largely for these problems also. So now we came to the end of this discussion, and we have discussed about essentials of CFD program. We looked into the issues in large-scale CFD problems, give you some introduction on turbulence and grid generation, discussed the architecture of high-performance computing. We also looked into NPI programming using domain decomposition method, looked into CUDA, which is for GPUs, and gave you some examples on applications on large engineering problem and why performance enhancement is important. Otherwise, these problems you cannot solve in realistic time. So using high-performance computing or GPUs are important here. If you are interested to learn more about high-performance computing, I will be offering a course in NPTEL which will start from this September. The enrollment is still on. High-performance computing for scientists and engineers, and I'll actually teach how to write programs for MPI for multiple computers or for GPUs cards, so to say for matrix solver solution programs.